Hello and welcome back to the Ever-Changing World podcast. I'm your host, Ava Zanetti, and I hope you've enjoyed your week. I am back for another day. The podcasts look like they will be uploaded every Tuesday. I'm going to make sure that happens. Today's podcast episode is super exciting as so much news has come out in this area. Of course, I'm talking about the James Webb Space Telescope. It has recently launched, and many things and many recent news has recently happened in actually the past few days. As of recording this, I believe some of the news has just came out. So this episode is going to be super exciting. Of course, I love space, so this is a super interesting topic for myself. I could talk about this for hours and hours and hours, so you kind of get to listen in on a few moments of that. Before I get into the bulk of this episode, I hope you enjoyed last week's podcast. I hope you guys are planning. I definitely know I am trying to get better at planning. I have a ton of summatives to do this week, and I am trying to plan everything out. I mean, I'm recording this on a Monday night, and I have a presentation tomorrow, so definitely working on my planning skills, and I hope you guys are too. 2022 is going to be a great year, and I hope you guys use some of that advice from last week's episode. In terms of today's topics, I really want to look into a few key areas of the James Webb Telescope. And, before I kind of discuss those areas and before I get into it, I want to give a background on myself and on my interest in space, because I think that'll give you a good idea of why I'm so interested in this telescope in the first place, and maybe get you a bit excited about this as well. So I have always really loved space, ever since I could pretty much walk, I have loved space. Of course, when I was younger, I had the whole, I want to be an astronaut, and I mean, even now to this day, if anybody wants to send me to space, they definitely can. I love space, and I definitely would go, and I'd love to be able to do that. And as well, when I was younger, I had thoughts of going into physics, theoretical or astrophysics, though I don't think I like math enough to go into physics, so I don't think that's on the plate anymore in terms of career, but I've always just been fascinated by space. I mean, the idea that we've gone up there is insane, and the idea that we've gone to the moon is insane, and I mean, the person we're talking about today regarding the telescope helped us get to the moon. So it's quite crazy how fast we've come in such a short amount of time. The space program is still quite new, and all of the things that we've discovered in these, only a few hundred years of really looking up the stars in lots of different ways is insane. From Galileo to now the James Webb Telescope, we have really been able to set our eyes onto the cosmos and learn so much about this thing that a lot of people really didn't even think existed. If we really think about it back, even a few hundred years ago, maybe 1,000 years ago, people did not believe that this was a thing. In Galileo's time, people didn't believe that the Earth wasn't the only thing, and that they didn't believe that the sun orbited, the Earth orbited the sun. They believed that the sun orbited the Earth. So, a few hundred years ago, these discoveries would sound like witchcraft, but now it's really coming to fruition, and even the science and physics we understand today could really be broken and twisted with the knowledge we gain from the James Webb Telescope. So we're definitely in such an exciting time. We have so much technology at our disposal, which I think is so amazing. It's so great to be born in this time, living in this time, and understanding everything that we do and getting to be at the forefront of all this new technology, going to Mars and all of that. Though I won't be discussing going to Mars today, I do want to focus on the James Webb Telescope. So leading into that, I hope you get a decent understanding of how much I love space. I mean, talking about it right now, you probably can get a good idea as well. I think everybody has some sort of fascination for space. I mean, it's going to help us become a multi-planetary species, and it's such a wonderful thing to learn about. And it's so exciting. So I think many people are going to enjoy this episode. Even if you aren't super into the space industry, that is absolutely fine. That's what I'm here to talk about today. That's what I'm help you understand. So I have kind of 6 main topics to discuss about the James Webb Telescope today. And I might be doing a little bit of research as we go, so bear along with me. But the first 6 that I have here is kind of who is Webb and why is he important. The second is what is Hubble, the importance and what has it done. You will understand why Hubble relates with Webb shortly. as well as what Webb is doing, so kind of what it's accomplishing and why we have this telescope going out into space. Fourth, I want to talk about kind of the differences between Hubble and Webb and what they do. Fifth, I want to talk about what has currently happened. There's been some new exciting developments in this area, so I want to talk about those and what has currently happened on this day. For reference, today is January 10th, 2022. January 10th, 2022. So if you are not listening in recent time, there could be way more developments, especially if you're listening about 6 months from now. There's going to be more developments. So research if you are listening to it a little bit later. As well, the final thing I want to talk about, of course, is the future of Webb and what comes next. What is going to happen when it gets to the L2 point. So, to start off on today's episode, I'm going to talk about who is Webb and why is he important. You may be wondering, well, this is, you're talking about space. Why don't you just talk about space? Who cares about why it's named after someone? But really, naming something after someone, no matter if it's a monument or a building or a telescope, has a significance. There's always a reason why something is named after someone. Of course, it could just be because someone bought a building and they just named it after themselves. That happens a lot. But if it is named in honor of someone, it is named in honor of someone for a huge reason. You don't just name things after someone just because. There is a reason. You're not just going to name a telescope after someone just off the street, right? Webb has been such an important person in space development and in spaceflight and in the Apollo era, in the moon program. So that is kind of what I want to discuss today and really get an idea of, to think about, because, James Webb has been so important, and we named the telescope after him for a reason. So as I mentioned, he was a part of the Apollo era. So a little bit of brief history on the background of spaceflight. Of course, we know about the Cold War and the Soviets versus America over getting to the moon. So kind of the Soviets began their space program. It was originally for military reasons, then it was kind of for prestige points and all of that, which I can discuss at another point. But to kind of brush over that, NASA was formed in the late 1950s. I just looked it up, if you heard me typing, to make sure I got the right date. It was founded on July 29th, 1958. And James Webb entered at NASA in February 1961, and he was there until November 1968. So he was not an engineer, he was not a scientist, he was not really anybody that did anything with the specific aircraft. He actually was a government official. So, kind of looking, and all the resources that I use in today's episode is from NASA directly. Again, I will always link those in the bio if you want to do more research, and you can kind of see if I'm picking anything out of these resources, that's what I'm talking about. So, looking at kind of Webb and who he was a manager and an attorney and a businessman. So, kind of looking at this, he served as a director of the Bureau of the Budget and as an undersecretary of state in the Truman administration. So he served as president and vice president of multiple private firms and served on the board of directors for McConnell Aircraft Company. So he was not, again, as I mentioned, a science or engineer, which is something that actually President Kennedy asked him to consider when he had the job as the NASA administrator. So if you don't know, President Kennedy was a huge role in getting us to the moon. Of course, he passed away and got shot before he could ever see it come to fruition, though he was such an important man. A great book that I highly recommend, that I have read a bunch, all these facts I know about it, is from the book Shoot for the Moon. It is all about the beginning of spaceflight to Apollo 11. It is by James Donovan, and again, I will link that in the description. Anyhow, President Kennedy was a huge prominent figure during this time. He was the whole person that said, let's get to the moon by the end of this decade, and the end of the decade was the end of the 60s. So that's why we got to there in 1969. That's why we got to the moon in 1969. So it was really all off of Kennedy's behalf. He always, had such a a prominent want for us to go to the moon. He realized the importance, and, truly without his support, I don't know if we would have gotten there as quick as we could. Of course, their technology was super advanced for its time, so, all of this, it was absolutely insane. We did it in the time frame that we did, and in doing so, Kennedy really pushed us to do that, and especially when he passed, I think that put another fire under people. Anyhow, so he was such an important person, so whenever you hear kind of Kennedy during this beginnings of NASA time, you may wonder, well, why was he important? Well, he just did so much. He inspired so many, and, you can do more research on that, and I'm sure I'll talk about that in further episodes, but he was an important, very important man, and that's why we have a whole space center named after him in Florida. Anyway, so a lot of people in the specific scientific community at this time was actually extremely anxious about Webb. So, of course he was not a scientist, and he didn't really know anything about space. So, they really wanted someone who knew about space, who had an interest in space, who had a background in space. Because, they think, of course, this person would understand what we're doing a lot better than someone who just kind of randomly walked in. Sure, Webb might be experienced, but what's experience going to bring to the table when, they have a love for space or they have a love for science? That could be a lot more. So, the scientific community, of course, would be hesitant. And, it worried them. Though, within a few months, he kind of proved where he stood. So, again, looking at NASA's website, at the height of the Apollo program, NASA had 35,000 employees and more than 400,000 contractors and thousands of companies and universities. One of the most notable universities you probably heard of is MIT. They did a ton for the Apollo area, and that was across Webb's direction. So, they, of course, had the whole job of getting a man on the moon, which they did do, and that was because of Webb. So, I don't have the exact details on exactly how much his budgeting was good, and that is, again, in that book that I had read, Shoot for the Moon, though I'm going to just kind of explain what he did. So, originally, I believe it was around $13 billion they estimated that the Apollo program would cost at the time. And again, I'm kind of just paraphrasing. I don't have the resource right in front of me, so take this as a grain of salt. Do your own research to make sure I'm saying things right. But they originally, the scientists thought it would cost around $13 billion, and Webb actually told the government that it would cost $20 billion. And the NASA people, people that worked at NASA said, "You're crazy, like, why are you overballing so much? Why are you adding so much money?" And, what's really funny is that it actually cost a bit more than what Webb had originally said. It cost a bit more than that. So, if they went with the $13 billion, or how much exactly it was, that the Apollo program would cost, they would be really screwed, because then the government would say, well, you said it would only cost $13 billion, and now you're asking for more, and you're asking for a lot more. This is ridiculous. So Webb really played a huge role in budgeting as well, which I think is a really important thing to note, because, as much as you can think about space and all of this and all these amazing things that happen in space, you can kind of look over the fact that budgeting is super important. I mean, even to this day, NASA doesn't get paid a ton. I believe they get, with inflation, they get paid similarly to what they did around this time. I mean, they've been paid similarly for a bit, but they don't get paid a lot. So having a master of budgeting is super important. As well, there was a lot of different wars and conflicts going on during this time, and a lot of people didn't want to worry about spaceflight. They thought it was ridiculous. They could have had domestic issues to fight rather than spaceflight. So Webb kind of contradicted that. He combated that, and with doing so, he afforded us to go to the moon. And without that, truly, we just wouldn't have been able to afford to go to the moon, no matter what. So that was super, super important on his part, especially when a bunch of people who aren't scientists are listening to the budget. It was important, because Webb was not a scientist, but he talked to other non-scientists. So he kind of, he stopped using all the specific science terms that a senator might not understand or might not know, and he skipped over that and explained in really simple terms why they needed the money, why it was important, and that helped them tremendously, because, as much as a scientist or an engineer, they're brilliant, of course, and they would know so much about it, they probably wouldn't have the budgeting skills and the skills as a business person and who has been through multiple practices and who has the skills of talking to an audience in a simple way and talking to a specific audience how they should be spoken to, right? Senators should be spoken to a different way than scientists should be spoken to when talking about these issues. So Webb was a super, super important man during this time. Here I have a little quote. So as NASA Administrator Sean O'Keefe said when he announced a new name for the Next Generation Space Telescope, he said, "It is fitting that Hubble's successor would be named in honor of James Webb. Thanks to his efforts, we got our first glimpses at the dramatic landscape of outer space. He took our nation on its first voyages of exploration, turning our imagination into reality. Indeed, he laid the foundations at NASA as one of the most successful periods of astronomical discovery. As a result, we're rewriting the textbooks today with the help of the Hubble Space Telescope, the Centroid X-ray Observatory, and the James Webb Telescope." So, that quote, really, I couldn't have said it any better. James Webb was such an important man, and really, I truly as well don't think it should have been named after anybody else, as he was so, so important, and he helped so many people get to space, and truly, I don't think we'd be as far as we are without him. So he was an amazing man, and knowing who he is, I think you can kind of put into perspective of why the telescope is named after him, and you can kind of get an idea from the quote as well as what this telescope is doing. It's looking at more space discovery, and looking at more astronomical things that we can learn. So when we look at who people are named after, it is so important. I mean, the example I gave previously as well is Kennedy. President Kennedy was super important as well in this era, and that's why he has a whole NASA building named after him. So all these people were super important, and this time in history was probably one of the biggest. I mean, we haven't had a huge accomplishment in spaceflight, or really in a while, as a nation for a very long time. So the Apollo missions were definitely very vital for us. So the next thing I want to definitely talk about is, what is Hubble? So you guys have probably seen all of the beautiful Hubble images online. If you look up Hubble image of the day, there's so many different images that pop up. You can see the images that were taken on your birthday, all of that sort of stuff. It's a fun thing you can look up if you're really interested in it. And you see these beautiful, beautiful galaxies and nebulas and all these crazy astronomical occurrences in outer space taken by Hubble. And you really think, how is this thing taking these pictures? And are we just sending out, a camera to take pictures? And really, it's not just about that. So before I get into the details of Hubble, again, I will talk about what it's named after. So it was named in honor of the trailblazing astronomer Edwin Hubble. So basically, it is a large space-based observatory which has revolutionized astronomy since its launch and deployment by the shuttle Discovery in 1990. So during a little bit ago, per se, the space shuttle program was huge. There was multiple deployments of space shuttles, multiple different types of space shuttles. A few of them were usable, a few of them crashed, which, of course, you can hear the whole big Challenger explosion, one of the most tragic events that you can think of in space history. But these did a lot. They built the ISS as well, which I will not be mentioning in detail, but they also helped deploy Hubble. So these rocket ships, is what they really are, helped do a lot for us and helped let us research even more. So those have also been really important in our history. So that is what Discovery is. Again, I am reading this from the NASA website in case you were wondering. So basically a little quote here is, "Far above rain clouds, light pollution, and atmospheric distortions, Hubble has a crystal clear view of the universe. Scientists have used Hubble to observe from the most distant stars and galaxies yet seen, as well as planets in our solar system." So basically, Hubble, had a certain time period that it'd be operable for, but it's actually grown immensely, and it's had over 30 years of operation. So this thing has been out there for a very, very long time. Of course, it was deployed in 1990. So whenever you're listening to this, you can kind of think about how long that has been. So this is, so mentioning why this has lasted so long, it is because new cutting-edge scientific instruments have been added to this telescope over the course of 5 astronaut servicing missions. So by replacing and upgrading aging parts, these servicing missions have greatly extended the telescope's lifetime. So without astronauts, we would not have the telescope that we have today. So Hubble has been super, super, super important. It has really been at the help of astronauts as well. So Hubble has made more than 1.5 million observations over the course of its lifetime. So over 19,000 peer-reviewed science papers have been published on its discoveries, and every current astronomy textbook includes contributions from the observatory. That is so huge. I mean, one space telescope having been in every single textbook, and, astronomy textbook, of course, and being such a prominent thing is insane. I mean, all these crazy images that you see of space, that you might put as your wallpaper, or you might look at in awe, you might like the picture on NASA, is probably from Hubble. That's how much of an impact it's had. We don't think about where these things come from, but Hubble has been so important. And not just for pretty pictures. It has tracked down interstellar objects as they soared through our solar system, watched a comet collide with Jupiter, and discovered moons around Pluto. It has also found dusty disks and stellar nurseries throughout the Milky Way that may become fully fledged planetary systems, and studied the atmospheres of planets that orbit other stars. So Hubble has peered back into the universe's distant past to locations more than 13.4 billion light-years from Earth, capturing galaxies merging, probing the supermassive black holes that lurk in their depths, and helping us better understand the history of the expanding universe. So that point is really important, mentioning looking in the past, and that is kind of what James Webb is going to be doing, and I'll be mentioning that in a moment. But kind of explaining this concept of looking at locations 13.4 billion light years from Earth. How would this make sense that we can see from the past? Well, light travels fast, but not as fast as you'd think. So on these very large distances, if you look at a star in the sky, let's say, it is probably billions of years old. And that is because of how fast light travels from us to a respective object in the sky. So if we use the sun, for example, it takes about 8 minutes from the sun's light to get from the sun to Earth. So if we think about that kind of speed on such a large scale, from these crazy objects all the way on the solar system, we can see the past, literally, which is absolutely insane to think about. I've always loved thinking that we can quite literally see the past of all of these objects, see the past of the universe. Just by kind of looking through our telescopes. So that's why Hubble has been able to look back so far. We don't have a time machine, but if you count a telescope looking at distant objects a time machine, well, there you have it. That's a time machine. So kind of seeing that, it's super insane. And also, I'll be detailing kind of more on how that works in Webb. And of course, I'm paraphrasing again. I'm not using quite the proper astronomical terms, so I'd also make sure you're looking in textbooks and making sure that I'm fully correct, but that's kind of the layman's terms of it, that we can kind of see the past from these things, which is really crazy to think about. So in over 30 years of operation, Hubble has made observations that have captured humanity's imaginations and deepened our knowledge of the cosmos, and continue to do so for many years to come. So, just want to make sure that I have all the details on Hubble. I mean, has been such an important telescope for all of us and for astronomy, and it's so interesting to think about it. So, I'm going to make sure I have a few more little facts here to make sure that I don't miss anything. So, looking at this, I do want to mention that we cannot service Hubble anymore because of the retirement of the space shuttle, so just so you know that we cannot keep servicing it. So here I also have a little fact that Hubble is not expected to re-enter Earth's atmosphere until the mid to late 2030s at the earliest. So from now, about in 10 years, it'll probably hit the atmosphere, and that's at the earliest. So mentioning here, due to a force called atmospheric drag, which affects the orbits of satellites like Hubble in low Earth orbit, Hubble's altitude is slowly decreasing. So eventually it will re-enter, just like other things like the ISS. Those things will all eventually re-enter. So I do want to make a pointer of that, because I did not mention this, that Hubble is in low Earth orbit. So it's not sitting on the ground like a normal observatory. It's just a little bit above Earth, where it's kind of considered that it's in space. Though, if you really think about it, it's not that deep into space. While Webb is going out much, much farther, which is why I can see much, much farther, which is what I will go into right now. So Hubble has been super important. It's in low Earth orbit. Eventually it will come down, but everything that we've learned from it has been insane. It's super cool to learn about, and definitely check out all those cool images that we've had. We've learned a lot from it, and it's definitely done us part. So now we need to talk about Webb. So, the James Webb Telescope is so revolutionary. So they've been working on this thing for about 3 years. So I want to make sure I get this fact right. I'm going to look this up. So, let me make sure I got this right. Sorry about that little awkward pause. But I want to make sure I want to make sure I get all these details right, so you're not misled in any way, shape, or form. Though I do believe it has been kind of built for 30 years. I know it's been built for decades and decades, and this launch has been pushed back and back and back. Okay, here it is. So discussions of a Hubble follow-on started in the 1980s, but serious planning began in the 1990s. So basically, after Hubble, they were thinking, okay, we need to do something else, and that's where Webb was born. So this has been built through NASA and the CSA and the ESA, so that's the Canadian Space Agency, as well as the European Space Agency. And really what the James Webb Telescope is going to do, it's going to help us learn even more about our early universe. So as much as Hubble has looked into our early universe and done what it could, James Webb is going to do so much more. So, kind of here detailing from NASA once again, it will study every phase of cosmic history. So, from within our solar system to the most distant observable galaxies in the early universe. So, how are they going to do this, you may ask? Well, they're going to use a specific infrared telescope. So, it's made of, kind of infrared technology that will explore a wide range of science questions to help us understand the origins of the universe and our place in it. So, looking at this, it's such a powerful such a powerful telescope. The scale of how powerful Hubble is pretty crazy. But looking at Webb, it's such a powerful scope. The most powerful telescope that we've ever had. And it's going to be super important for us. So, it's such a prominent thing in the space industry as well as for astronomers, and Webb has been so important. If you've heard a lot about it in the news, this is why. And basically, scientists will use Webb to study planets and other bodies in our solar system to determine their origin and evolution and compare them with exoplanets. So exoplanets that are not planets in our solar system, planets in other solar systems, and planets that orbit other stars, basically. So Webb will also observe exoplanets located in their stars' habitable zones. So basically, when a planet is in a habitable zone, this is called the Goldilocks zone. Just like the fairy tale Goldilocks, not too hot, not too cold. This is where a planet is habitable, which means a life form can live on it. So it can be something as small as a little microorganism, all the way to, something like humans or crazy aliens. So looking at this, we can kind of see, really, are there other species out there? And of course, we're looking basically into the past. So these species could very well be dead, but knowing that there could be life outside of our solar system is super important and super exciting, and something that I hope I will be able to know one day in my lifetime. And hopefully Webb will be able to do that, and we'll be able to figure something out. Though I do think there definitely is species on other planets, though we won't get into that discussion. So pretty much in these habitable zones, it means that they could harbor water on its surface, which could basically say if habitability is present. So of course, as you know, on Earth, every species needs water, And that would be likely for other species, that they would need water to survive. So looking at that is how we can kind of determine if these exoplanets would have species on it. So this is using a technique called transmission spectroscopy, which the observatory will examine starlight filtered through planetary atmospheres to learn about their chemical composition. So that's like a really huge mouthful that I just said there. I'm sure I pronounced a lot of words wrong, but basically it's just going to be able to determine the basics of whether or not the exoplanets have life on it or not, which is super, super exciting stuff. So, let me make sure I have all the web details right. I totally recommend going to the website. It has so much information on it, as well as some super cool things to see where web actually is. I am going to look right here. I believe I already have this open, and I'm looking something up I don't need to, but that is okay. So looking here, it's going to observe kind of the very first stars and where they formed and galaxies over 13.5 billion years ago. The really interesting thing is, as I mentioned, 13.4 billion years, 13.5 billion years ago. We're still kind of unsure how long it's been, though many scientists say around 13 billion years ago the Earth started from the Big Bang, so that's kind of what we go off on. But, you can kind of think about however you'd like to. So I'm going to mention a few quick facts about Webb, so you can kind of get a good idea of how big this thing is. Of course, again, you might want to look up what it looks like, so you can kind of get an idea of what I'm talking about, so you don't have to exactly picture what it is, and think about that. So, right here, let me make sure I get this right. So, on Webb, there is a primary mirror. So, if you are looking at an image, it's this kind of big gold-plated mirror, though there isn't actually a lot of gold in it, which has that appearance. But it's this huge thing with kind of these 18 gold-plated hexagonal deployable segments, which is kind of the mirror shape. And this size is about 21.3 feet or 6.5 meters across. So if you want to think about it, they do mention a lot how the sun shield, which is underneath it, is about the size of a tennis court. So this mirror is huge, and the sun shield is also huge. So the sun shield is underneath Webb. And the reason why there's a sun shield is so that the sun cannot hit Webb and kind of disturb its findings. So what Webb will be doing when it gets to its L2 point, or its deployment point, is it's going to be turned around from the sun, so the sun can't disturb any heat on it, and it's going to have these sun shields to make sure it doesn't do that. And it has these 5 very thin, it's about the size of a human hair, and it's going to kind of hit that. So the L2 point, which I've mentioned, which I do want to mention so you make sure you understand what it is basically just a location in space that we picked, and it's 1 million miles or 1.5 million kilometers away from Earth, and it is orbiting the sun. So it's called the second Lagrange point, or L2 point. So these sun shields are super important, as well as the primary mirror, of course, and this is going to help so it doesn't overheat. And the primary mirror is the big gold thing that you see in all these images, and I'm also looking at an image here to make sure you get an idea of it. And then they kind of have these sticks pointing out into almost this triangular shape, pointing in front of it. That's the secondary mirror. And of course, there are the sun shields. So those are kind of the main important things on Webb. All of these things help, of course, Webb do what it needs to do, and do the science that it needs to do. So kind of looking at the sun shield, which I want to make sure I got those details correct. Yes, it does keep it cool. So basically, it'll observe primarily the infrared light from very faint and distant objects. So in order to be able to detect those faint heat signals, it'll need to be extremely cold. So the telescope needs to be super, 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 super cold, and that is what the sun shield is going to do and what it's going to be protecting. So I did get that correct. Thank goodness. And that's basically what the sun shield will be doing, and that's why it is super important. And even though the sun shield is super thin and it looks like a bunch of tinfoil slapped together, it is doing a lot. and a lot more than you think it would for the little amount that is there. So, now moving into the fourth thing I want to talk about, the difference between Hubble and Webb. So, as you heard, both Hubble and Webb are looking into the distant past of the universe. Looking at that, you really think, okay, well then isn't just Webb replacing Hubble? You know, Hubble's in a lower Earth orbit, you might say. It's useless now. Webb's going out 1,000,000 miles away, literally. And it's going to be able to signal so much more. And it's going to signal these faint things and explore so much more. What is this doing? So a lot of people usually kind of think of Webb as a replacement for Hubble, though NASA likes to think as Webb as kind of the little stronger brother to Hubble. So they both have their importance. So Webb is kind of the scientific successor to Hubble. So science goals were motivated by the results from Hubble. So Hubble's science pushed us to look at longer wavelengths, to go beyond what Hubble has already done. So in particular, more distant objects are more highly redshifted, and their light is pushed back from the UV and the optical into the near infrared. Thus, observations of these distant objects, like the first galaxies formed in the universe, for example, requires an infrared telescope. So Hubble helped us want to explore more, which I think is great. And Hubble has had its importance, a huge importance, and Webb is also going to have such a huge importance for us. So talking about redshift, this is a super interesting topic, and I want to make sure I describe this right, as I've been kind of researching on the go a little bit here during this podcast, because as much as I discuss talk about my knowledge, I am not a scientist, and I want to make sure that I am saying all the right things. So basically here, redshift is the displacement of the spectrum of an astronomical object toward the longer red wavelength. So kind of speaking in a little bit of an easier way, when we see objects, and we see they have this kind of red tinge, that's what we're talking about, this redshift. And then we also see blue shift, which we see kind of more of a blue coloring to it. So when a star emits light, the color of its light absorbed on Earth depends on its motion relative to Earth. So if a star is moving towards the Earth, the light is shifted to higher frequencies of the color spectrum, so more bluish. And a higher frequency shift is called the blue shift, so that's exactly what I mentioned. In contrast, if a star is moving away from Earth, its light is shifted to lower frequencies on the color spectrum, which is more of a red shift. So what we think, and to mention this and why things are moving away from us and why things are moving closer to us, we think, of course, that the universe is expanding. And if the universe is expanding, there must have been a point that it expanded from, which of course is the whole idea of the Big Bang. We think the Big Bang is the way that it started. It makes the most sense using our current physics knowledge right now. We don't know a lot, actually, about the universe. As much as we know, there's still so much to know. We have the whole conversations about dark matter, as well as, thinking about Big Bang. And yeah, okay, maybe it started from this one little point, but what was there before it? How did it just come from nothing? How would that make any sense either? So, kind of looking into that, it's a super interesting concept, and if you really want to go into the details of the Big Bang, and that's what we're going to be learning from Webb, so hopefully we learn about that soon, so these debates can kind of die down, and we can truly learn about why the universe started, how it started, really how, in more ways than why. But this whole redshift blue shift concept is super important, because when we see a more red object, we know it's farther away from us, we know it's moving away from us. So we know that kind of the universe is expanding. That's why we have this knowledge of that the universe is expanding using this blue and red light. So all of these crazy space topics are super interesting. If you want to do more research on it, again, I highly recommend it. So, kind of Webb allows us to look at these redshifts and really be able to look at this at an infrared level that Hubble could not do, and at a stronger level, and be able to explore all the things that Hubble has taught us in a deeper, more thoughtful level. So Hubble and Webb are both super important, and without Hubble we cannot have Webb. And of course Webb is going to expand our knowledge, but Hubble has been super important. So I hope those little descriptions of those space facts also helped as well, and if you need to do more research, definitely do it. because I definitely am probably not the person to describe that in the best way possible. But I hope you got a good idea of blue shift and redshift from that little explanation. So, moving into my 5th point, what has happened? This is super, super exciting. I can't believe it. The Space Webb Telescope, the James Webb Telescope, mixing my words here, is fully deployed. What does that mean? Deployed from when? How? Okay, let me start on December 25th, 2021. The James Webb Telescope launched. It launched on our largest rocket that we actually have. It had to be folded. So the whole issue with Webb is that it's just too massive. It sounds funny, but the Webb telescope was just too big. It was too big to fit in any rocket that we have to date. And in the rocket that we have, we had to kind of squish it in, almost. So we had to fold Webb. And the reason why it's so exciting that it has been fully deployed is that it's fully opened up. Which means that all of the danger points that we had, which I believe there are about 300 points that could go wrong, and if anything of those points went wrong, it could not work. That means Webb could not work. If one of 300 things went wrong, it could not work. Which was super concerning and super nerve-wracking. And it still is super nerve-wracking, as we aren't at the L2 point yet, though it's fully deployed so we can breathe a little bit right now. But basically on December 25th, it finally launched. This thing has been in the works for over 30 years. People have dedicated their whole lives and their whole careers to this telescope, and it's finally launched. I mean, you might have heard about this launching a few years ago, and it was supposed to launch a few years ago, but it didn't. And now it finally did, which is great. So it had, as I mentioned here in this Forbes article that I'm reading from, it had 300 single-point failure items, which I didn't mention, 50 parts, and 178 release mechanisms of the $10 billion telescope. And if it did not work, if one thing went wrong, it could not work. Which, $10 billion down the drain, and 30 years would be a lot for the space community. So, they were able to do it. They were able to fully deploy it. So, what does this exactly mean? And kind of, what does the deployment mean? So, here again from the Forbes article, Webb's thrilling and flawless deployment has seen its 5-layer sun shield lowered. So that was those really thin little kind of tinfoil-like things I talked about a bit earlier. Unfurled and tensioned. So that means it's been fully kind of, if the way to think about tensioned is that if two people were at the end of a parachute and they were both kind of pulling towards themselves, that's when it's tensioned. So when it's kind of propped up like that, like a trampoline. Or a sturdy trampoline. And the sun shield has 5 super thin layers, dozens of pigeons, motors, gears, springs, and a whopping 1,312 feet of cables. That is crazy. And all these, there was 107 release mechanisms that need to fire to cue this. So deployment has also involved the primary golden segmented mirror to be raised and a secondary mirror extended. And the wings open. So basically the whole thing to open up. So it was folded like a little piece of origami into this massive rocket, and now it's finally been unfolded without the paper really crumpling a lot, which is really, really nice to see. So thinking about that, I also want to get a little bit more information about the full deployment. I believe it just began, the full deployment happened 2 days ago. So January 8th. It happened. Want to get the right date there. And it fully locked into place. Of course, everybody was super exciting. And now it's just traveling out to the L2 point. So, again, this has been super important and super exciting. I'm so glad I'm recording this episode today because it's been fully deployed and that's something super exciting. So, again, I do want to mention this point, actually, this is super interesting. The size also meant, so the size of the telescope, that there wasn't a vacuum chamber on Earth large enough to test the telescope and its fully unfurled configuration. Instead, engineers are carefully watching how the telescope reacts to the super cold zero-G environment of space as it deploys and adjusting the deployment phase accordingly. That is insane to me. There's nothing big enough on the planet to test the thing, to put the thing in a rocket, there was nothing big enough to properly manage Webb, which is really funny to think about, but it's quite amazing how far technology has come, that we can just do this and that engineers can watch this thing from a million miles away and make sure that it's working. Of course, astronauts can't go out there and fix it, but they can kind of make sure that it's doing what it needs to do in the way, the best way it can. So they couldn't test this thing, and that's why it's also super exciting that it fully unfurled, and we couldn't fix it while it's up there, so it is super exciting and important for everybody, and I think that is super exciting that it's been fully deployed. Now, I do want to talk about what comes next. So, now that we know, okay, yeah, whatever, it's been deployed, it's opened up, when are we going to get some pictures? Because Webb is also going to take some pretty pictures of pretty galaxies that Hubble has, and maybe there'll be different galaxies that we can see, different solar systems, whatever it may be. So, kind of the idea here is that it's going to observe the universe again from the L2 point, a million miles away, and it'll get there, as of right now, Forbes is saying, it will get there on January 23rd, 2022. I want to get the little Where is Webb website pulled up here. This is a great website to see where exactly Webb is. You might be a little too late if you're listening to this episode while Webb is at the L2 point. But here's actually the little image that I have here. So on this website, you can kind of see where Webb is. You can see what temperature the cold side is. Right now, it's at minus 298 degrees Fahrenheit, which is pretty insane. And the hot side is at 131 degrees Fahrenheit, which is, again, pretty insane. It's way past the moon. That happened a long time ago. The sun shield's been deployed, secondary mirror, primary mirror, and now the mirror segments is kind of something that they're waiting for, I believe, based off this little diagram here. So it's almost at the L2 point, which is super exciting. Time of recording this is 13 days away, though you might be listening to this later, so it's probably already there. So from there, okay, yay, it's at the L2 point. Now what it's going to do? Well, it's going to get there, and it's going to make sure that it has to align. So basically, they need to phase the mirror and make sure that it's aligning properly and making sure the instruments are working. So they'll start turning on the instruments after a week or two, so that they can kind of cool them down and calibrate them to get ready for their quote-unquote first light. So they can't just start working this thing. They have to make sure it cools down, and they calibrate it and get it ready, kind of like when you start your computer and let it slowly wake up, especially if an older one. They have to kind of do that, which is kind of funny. So January 11th, so the mirror deployment will begin on Tuesday, January 11th, which is actually tomorrow for me, and if you're listening to this, that is on the day it came out, that's today. And it is expected to last for 2 weeks. So, though the mirror won't be fully aligned until April 24th, 2022, it's going to be a very kind of painstaking task. So they talk about how long of a process this is going to be. So it's going to take about 5.5 months or 6 months to switch on and test Webb's instruments. So it's going to take a long time before we get some beautiful images from Webb. It's going to take a little bit. The first images are not going to come out, from my point of view, for about 5.5 months, 6 months. So it is a little bit of a waiting game to the first images before we get any exciting space facts. But as of right now, it is so exciting that Webb has been fully deployed. We have fully opened this thing up, and it is definite that Webb is going to, well, maybe not definite, again, knock on wood over here, but it is definite that it has been deployed, because it just happened a few days ago, and it's really promising that Webb is going to work, and we're going to discover a lot. I mean, through this, we could discover so much about our universe. There's so much physics that we could discover even, and this could quite literally rewrite textbooks. If we learn some sort of new physics concept from this telescope, we could rewrite our own literal textbooks, which is insane that we're at a time where technology has advanced as much where, this is almost expected. It's almost expected that we could rewrite textbooks and rewrite concepts and all of these things. I find it super exciting. I hope listening to the podcast you guys have found this super exciting. Kind of as a wrap up, I really think that the Webb telescope is super important, as well as Hubble, as I also mentioned. Both of these telescopes have been super important for space flight, and revolutionary for us, and revolutionary on the things that we understand and about the universe and how much we understand about it. We can learn so much from Webb, even if physics isn't completely changed from this, because it definitely could not be completely changed from this as well. Webb is going to be so important, and if the most you get out of this is some pretty space pictures, I think it's done a pretty good job. I also think that it's a super exciting time for the space industry. Looking into kind of the billionaire space race, quote unquote, and all the things happening in Webb. It's so exciting, and I hope if you're interested in space, you consider going into the space industry, research it at least. I know I'm still researching careers, so you definitely don't need to pick your path right away, but if you're passionate about something, definitely go towards it. And it's such an exciting and cool development in space history, even if you're not super interested in space. I think knowing about Webb, knowing a little bit about what it does, learning about who Webb is, learning about the Hubble Space Telescope has been good for you. And I think it's definitely so interesting. Again, I want to thank all of you for tuning in and listening to this podcast. It's my second podcast recording, so thank you for, again, bearing with me while I get kind of the podcast figured out. I'm glad I figured out finally a schedule date, so I will be posting every Tuesday. As of right now, that's what I think will be the best for me. Right now, all the podcasts are available either on the Acast website, or it's also available on Apple Podcasts where you can listen. I mean, if you're listening right now, you figured out how to get there, so that's great. You can also connect with me on Twitter and Instagram. So my Instagram handle for this podcast is ever.changingworld. Again, ever.changingworld. Go follow there for updates on when episodes will be coming out. The second one is Twitter, everchanging WOR. Everchanging WOR. You can see that again in the comments. WOR, again, if I did not say that correctly. Again, you can listen to this podcast on the website. Thank you guys all so much for listening about this. I hope you have a great week. I hope you have a great day. And I hope you are just as excited about space as I am. Again, thank you for tuning in and listening, and follow on all the socials. Thank you.